All right, let's go back to it here. Now, where we left off, well, we were talking about the Tiamat entries, of course, and I did forget to show off that two of the 8 of the mascots uh, do have their outfits complete. And then we have the other 2 that I hadn't been showing off here, not quite in as advanced a state, but you can get an idea for how they're going to look. So, old business from the first segment. Anyway, tonight we're going to be delving into the rules of Castles and Crusades here. Now, I'm linking Troll Lord Games if you're interested in it. You want to see more? That's their website. You can find them everywhere. This is definitely not a fly-by-night company. They've been around for a while. This is the 20th anniversary of Castles and Crusades. They're going to be out at GaryCon running, and there's a Kickstarter that they have going. There's a lot. This is not this is not just a first timers club. So in our past workshop, we introduced this. We went over the topic of what is an OSR RPG. What is old school Renaissance? What are the themes? What are things that you might be able to expect? And we determined that Castles and Crusades does meet this kind of spirit of challenge, of adventure. And when we did a very quick look, not into the rules necessarily, but we did read that rule 1 is have fun and adapt what you need to do. This system isn't billed as something that's very complex. This is not something that has a lot of minutia to it. We did look into the 2010 Quick Start rules. These were provided for free on their Twitter or on their X. So I brought this up and I did pass them along to you all over in our Discord. So if you would like to take a look at the system on your own, this is for a quick start guide. It's not just a little 2-page blurb. You get a lot of you get a lot of the idea. Well, for the themes, what kind of adventure are you getting? If you see the art like this, the bold, adventurous colors of yellow and orange here. We have this fight happening here with the party and this 2-headed serpent, or at least as part of a hydra, perhaps. This is doing a lot to convey that spirit of adventure, the thrill and the risk of combat that you get in this system. And we also learned that this system hasn't been putting out a new edition every couple years. This is not a Games Workshop thing where there's a new edition of 40K every couple years or whatever else. They're happy with what they have. It's here to stay. Plenty of first and third party supplements and adventures to give you a lot of inspiration and a lot of things to explore or even contribute to. Add to yourself. If you've ever said, you know what, I love doing this. My style of adventure just never seems to fit with the current D&D crowd. Maybe a system like Castles and Crusades then is the direction you want to take your third party creations. Offer it to people who do want to play through maybe a more gritty style adventure, or one where there are very heavy choices with dire consequences to be made, or things along those lines. Or if you say, you know what, I don't like how OSR is always portrayed in this light. I actually want something that is a lot more fluffy and happy, and a lot more like social encounters than needing to have these dire lethal stakes with monsters of all kinds. It's a role-playing game like anything else. So delve into it, have fun, and modify the rules as you would like. As you have the permission of the manufacturers, right? Not that you need it at your table. You already got the book. It's your game, your story at your table. But look, what's the first thing you do? Imagine a character. Just imagine the character. And things are going to go forward from there. Now, I am not going to take us through the quick start guide. I can. This is here, but as I have the book in the store, it is for sale, and I would suggest you talk to your friendly local game store about picking it up as well. The best way to keep things moving forward, if we're going to look at the rules, and hey, in full disclosure, I have never played a game of Castles and Crusades. I am not familiar with the rules. I'm learning them along with you all. I have an idea for the trajectory of it because I've played a lot of D&D. I started in 3rd edition, which is where we had this kind of branching off of the Siege engine. But this is over in the Table Talk section of our Discord. And if you go over to the Troll Lord Games Twitter, you should be able to find it as well. Now I have their books. They have a wonderful bundle that's up as well that you can pick up. And as I said, talk to your friendly local game store. So let's open up the Player's Handbook to Castles and Crusades and start our adventure through exploring the rules. I don't have an interest in getting into any kind of a semblance of nitty gritty. I for my own purposes of understanding things, I want to touch on the main aspects, and then we'll go deeper as time permits. James said I had a great OSR DM pre-plague, influenced my games a bit. Mega dungeons and kingdom building, more player challenges than skills, etc. And I'm glad that has left a lasting impression. And in your own way, then, James, you're passing that on to the players under you. Who will then go on and enjoy what you present, adapt it themselves, and go and teach others and teach others. We can see that, well, part of what James was talking about, of like castle building, land development, finding treasure, fighting monsters. If you look at all the gators that were back here in the background, you get that throwback to the origins, the spirit of Castles and Crusades here. And this alternate cover is also giving you a look at exactly what you're going to get. I mean, look at the intensity of this fight. What's going on here? What is the creature? Etc., etc. So you are already primed and ready to go. In this role-playing endeavor. Now, this was something that Daly had shared in that initial foray into the books. In the immortal days of our youth, we found high adventure and fought many a campaign against all manner of villainy and evil. We slew dragons, brought down corrupt tyrants, explored uncharted territories, and freed the world of grotesque creatures of mythical proportions. We were heroes on a crusade. These youthful adventures were brought to us by Gary Gygax through the medium of roleplay and the fantastic game that made it all possible. We bring you our own game now, one that we hope captures those early days of grand quests and exploration. The Castles and Crusades role-playing game pulls on those early experiences and makes them real again. First and foremost, we'd like to thank E. Gary Gygax for sharing his wonderful vision with the rest of us. Without it, none would have followed. Our hats are off to you, good sir. It is impossible to thank every person who has helped see this project through and ensure it was finally completed. The Troll Lords are personally indebted to a great many members of the Castles and Crusades Society for such unflagging support and help over the past year. There are no words which can suffice to express our heartfelt appreciation. So let us just say thank you. So we have a system built on these, with the hope of kindling these styles of adventures. These maybe a different take. If you started your role-playing adventure journey in life, in our IRL life, with D&D, not that you can't get high fantasy through there, of course you can. The style of play is different. The tone of D&D is also different. And whether it's good or bad, that's really a case-by-case basis. It's up to every individual. But as we go through here, what do we see with the art? What are some differences? What are similarities? What are things that that really do continue to give that feeling of, we have a group that wants to extend these wonderful adventures, the thrills of combat, and plumbing the depths of dungeons with everyone else who wants to come forward and play, regardless of age, of any of that. All right. Some more words here to read over if you want more of a primer. I'm not skipping them over because they're somehow intrinsically boring. I want to tonight get into the rules, and not just the spirit, or a little bit more of the fluff. But as you can see, this has continued to be reinforced where role playing and role playing meet. So this is not just crunch about numbers and charts and percentiles. This is that prompt to use your imagination, to use that DIY spirit of creativity that you might have in video games like Minecraft, or in other more recent iterations, if you're not familiar with the kind of play that this system wants to provide you, at least more easily provide you than perhaps others. So how does one capture that mood? Foremost, the rules guiding gameplay must be easily understood. Ideally, the basic rules of the game should be easily grasped within about 15 minutes, and we'll see if that's the case. A player should be able to sit down with another player, create a character, and have the basics of the game explained to them in just that time. As a foundation, the rules must be kept simple and logical, easy to comprehend and easy to enact. Expanding the game comes later, much like adding stories to a building. Start with a firm, square foundation, and everything else follows. The game must be adaptable as well. Gamers are diverse people with all different imaginations, different tastes, and different desires. They all want to play a game that suits their tastes. Those playing should be able to add, discard, and change rules and ideas to see fit, or to fit their needs, without worrying about the effects those changes have on the workings of the rest of the game. There should only be a few hard and fast rules. Everything else is extra. So if you're going, I don't know about this, what if it's like a super crunchy and all this? Well, what are we seeing? And we'll see. Can we pick this up in about 15 minutes? I do not need to explain to you what a role-playing game is. There are those out there. This may very well be their first. So in most systems, you will find a chapter or a couple pages dedicated to this idea to introduce exactly what a role-playing game is. And what a beautiful piece of art now to accompany that sense of wonderment, the sense of fantasy. We have the dark and foreboding castle and spire, maybe a little bit of odd or almost impossible architecture. We have the oncoming airship, and we have these vast landscapes of overgrown ancient lands. You're getting more of that feeling of what you can look forward to. So if you want to read this to get their particular take on what a role-playing game is, please do. What do you need to play? This player's handbook. That's most everything as a player, especially. If you're the castle keeper, the DM, GM, ST, in this case the CK, then there you go. You might want to pick up some other books too. To play Castles and Crusades, here's your standard polyhedral set: 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 20. So you might very well recognize, oh, D2, D3, got it. You know what? I've played a lot of D&D. And if you haven't, D is for die, right? How many sides on the die? Oh, sure. Having fun? This is no fun allowed. This is supposed to be drudgery. This is supposed to be, dyed in the wool, gate kept. You have to play it in only one way, otherwise you're not really playing the game. What? Having fun? It is important to remember the main reason for playing RPGs is to have fun. First sentence, right there. Ultimately, Castles and Crusades is an amusing pastime in which family and friends gather to play a game and enjoy each other's company. Again, one can never win or lose a game of Castles and Crusades, as it's not that type of game. The only winners are those that go home happy every week after playing an entertaining game, have some stories to tell, and are eager for the next game to learn what happens to their characters next. Well, if that doesn't sound an awful lot like what I continually preach as well. Now, why do I bring this up in a very obvious manner? At least like bringing it back. Am I just tooting my own horn? No, I want to make sure that if any of you are watching and you might have hesitation about this game in particular, or about the concept of OSR games or whatever else, I want to very earnestly, and right here in front of you, I want to tear away those feelings of anxiety, or I don't know if it's right for me. This is the spirit that has been presented here. And I am not sponsored, by the way. I'm completely not sponsored. I paid for these copies of the books myself. They're all watermarked and everything. So I owe Trollord Games no favors to carry their physical books or to talk good or ill about them. I'm going over this because I do want to make sure that, as many of us have met through D&D over the years or more recently, that you do understand that there is that same spirit that you can find in many other systems. Some are very close to what you may have already experienced, but I don't want you to be afraid to try them. You're not betraying Wizards of the Coast. You're not betraying a friend group who is also going to be along that adventure with you all as well. Give it a go. And if you say, well, I don't know, like I'm really interested in playing All Flesh Must Be Eaten, or I'm really interested in playing Paranoia. The comedy and the setting really jive with me. Well, what about your friends also? Well, yeah, a lot of us get together and we share jokes and everything. It doesn't matter how popular that system is if you're having fun with it. And even more so if you're not somehow in like a contract to broadcast D&D and you're betraying some company by not doing that. So the concept of fun, the concept of winning here. We get to imagine a character, roll the attributes, choose a class, and of course there's minutia for all that. You have the summary, right? Barbarian draws upon vestigial primal will in combat. The bard influences others through the power of words. The cleric is avowed to a deity and dispenses divine justice. The druid owes allegiance to the natural powers of the world. The fighter is a warrior with great prowess on the battlefield. The illusionist magically distorts the perceptions of others. The knight is a natural leader and strong combatant. The monk conditions the body to withstand the rigors of war and the elements. The paladin is a warrior blessed by divinity, a paragon of good. The ranger is an extraordinary woodsman and warrior. The rogue is a rapscallion and opportunist. The wizard is a practitioner of powerful arcane magics. And the assassin is an expert at killing and eliminating targeted enemies. Choose a race, hit points. Many of you out there, I would imagine, are familiar with hit points. Optional rules, begins play with maximum. Or the player rolls their character's hit point die, the hit die HD, a number of times equal to 1 plus their con bonus, and takes the highest roll. They do this at the start of play and for each level thereafter. Talks about fleshing out your character so you're not just a pile of stats. And the attributes. Now that we're getting into the rules, I'm not interested in what the loadout of a monk is, but I am interested in what all the characters have to tap into. Each attribute has a numeric score ranging from 3 to 18. Each attribute score also has a corresponding modifier, which is a bonus or penalty added or subtracted from certain die rolls during the game as detailed throughout the rules. Sounds a lot like D&D, right? Now, as we saw in our first exploration, the chart isn't a 2-for-1 like you see in D&D. There are 2 types of attributes, primary and secondary. Of the 6 attributes each character has, the player selects a few to be primary attributes. The remaining attributes are secondary. The distinction is important when determining the outcome of many actions in Castles and Crusades. When a character uses a class ability, such as a rogue attempting to pick a fat giant's pocket, or a ranger tracking a brigand through a dark forest, an attribute check is rolled to determine if the action is successful. Each class ability has an attribute check associated with it. If the class ability's associated attribute is one of the character's primary attributes, the character has a greater chance of successfully performing the task. The same principle holds true for the other aspects of the game in which an attribute check is required. Attribute checks are explained in greater detail later. For now, just remember that the selection of primary and secondary attributes significantly affects the possibility of success for many actions in the game. Attribute checks associated with a primary attribute are significantly more likely to succeed than those actions performed with a secondary attribute. Strength reflects physical strength, including the ability to lift or move heavy objects and make powerful attacks. The modifier affects melee combat and damage. You're like, you know what? I've played D&D. What are you telling me this about? I'm here. I'm with it. I'm cool. I know what strength is. Characters can military press 10 times their strength and deadlift 15 times their strength score. Dexterity is the attribute that represents the character's reflexes, manual dexterity, and hand-eye coordination, including the ability to dodge and defend against attacks. The modifier affects armor class, ranged combat, and all checks involving dexterity. Constitution, this attribute reflects overall health and also represents a character's ability to withstand pain, suffer physical damage, avoid fatigue, and fight off sickness or poison. Modifier affects hit points, and it applies to all checks involving con. Intelligence, this attribute reflects mental aptitude. It represents a character's ability to learn quickly, apply that learning effectively, and use deductive reasoning. The modifier affects the number of arcane spells a character can cast each day, the number of languages a character can learn, and all checks involving intelligence. Wisdom. This attribute reflects depth of personal experience, the ability to make well-considered decisions or judgments, and represents a spiritual connection to a deity. The modifier affects the number of divine spells that can be cast each day, attempts to turn undead, and all checks involving wisdom. And good old-fashioned charisma. This attribute represents strength of attractiveness, willpower, personality, and leadership. It is the degree to which a character is able to influence others. The modifier affects a creature's loyalty and reactions to the character, the number of undead the character can turn, and all checks involving charisma. To generate attribute scores, they're generated by rolling 3d6. You add the results of the 3 dice together to create a total score that ranges between 3 and 18. This process is repeated 6 times. Once the 6 scores are generated, each score is assigned to one attribute in any order the player chooses. When assigning attribute scores, the player should consider the race and class of the character being created. A character's race may raise or lower an attribute score, and certain attribute scores may affect a character's class abilities. Normally, attribute scores only increase or decrease during the course of a game as a result of magic, poison, curses, or other extraordinary events. Should an attribute score change during gameplay, the modifier changes to correspond to the new score, if applicable. It is possible for an attribute score to fall below 3 or exceed 18 during gameplay. However, attribute scores for the characters that fall outside of this range are rare and are usually associated with monsters, powerful magical items, or other entities controlled by the castle. Each attribute score has a corresponding modifier that can alter die rolls in the game. The modifier is a number added to or subtracted from a roll of the die when a character uses an attribute to take an action, make a saving throw, or use a class ability. For example, a character attempting to bend the bars of a prison cell would have their strength modifier applied to the roll. The amount of damage delivered to a foe is likewise affected by the attribute modifier. A positive modifier is called a bonus, and a negative modifier a penalty. Higher attribute scores have higher bonuses, and lower attribute scores have larger penalties. So whether fighting a nasty troll, a hungry wyvern, or avoiding the gaze of a gorgon, attribute modifiers play a decidedly important role in the game. So far, so good. I mean, this seems to be fairly consistent with the way that D&D and even other systems present themselves. I did miss something here from James. Classic black and white art things I've played tended to be more adult and dangerful. CNC was a contemporary of 3rd or 3.5, which shows a little. Yes, that is true, James. Pardon me. That is true. Now, what about those primary and secondary attributes? There are 2 types of attributes, primary and secondary. Primary attributes are those physical or mental abilities in which a character is particularly well trained or very experienced in using. Secondary attributes are those the character uses with only average skill. A player selects the character's primary attributes after choosing a class and race. Human characters have 3 primary attributes. Demi-human races, dwarf, elf, gnome, half-elf, halfling, and half-orc, have only 2 primary attributes. Each class has 1 primary attribute associated with it that cannot be changed. The player selects the others. So, a human character receives 1 primary attribute designated by the class, and the other 2 are selected by the player. If playing a demi-human character, the player can select only 1 additional primary attribute. For example, the primary attribute for the ranger class is strength. If the player chooses to play an elf ranger, they select 1 of the 5 remaining attributes as the other primary attribute. If it were a human ranger, the player would select 2 more primary attributes rather than just 1. The remaining attributes are considered to be secondary. If you have caught a Grogrin's gaze, beware the terrors of the night. How you doing, Grogrin? As mentioned before, the distinction between primary and secondary attributes is important. Almost all non-combat actions in Castles and Crusades, for which the Castle Keeper deems a roll as necessary to determine a success or failure, are resolved by an attribute check. Every check has an associated attribute. Whenever one of these checks is made, a d20 is rolled by the player. Attribute modifiers are added to this roll, as is the character level if applicable. Which it almost always is. If the result is equal to... Okay, so here we go. In this case, this is telling us if the result is equal to or greater than a number generated by the Castle Keeper. If I recall from the quick start, it seemed like it had to beat the number, not meter beat. But as we're looking at the official book, this is saying equal to or greater than. Called the challenge class, then the attribute check is successful. The challenge class is a number generated by the Castle Keeper that represents the degree of difficulty for performing that action. The challenge class is generated in 2 steps. The first is ascertaining the challenge base. This is determined by whether or not the associated attribute is a primary or secondary one. If the associated attribute is a primary attribute, the challenge base is 12, and if it's a secondary attribute, the challenge base is 18. Next, the Castle Keeper adds or subtracts the challenge level to the challenge class. The challenge level represents the degree of difficulty the Castle Keeper believes appropriate for the action being taken. This usually ranges between 0 and 10, but can go higher. The sum total is the challenge class, and the player must roll higher. Okay, so in this case, the player must roll higher than that to successfully perform the action. Hi, Miller. Oh, that sounds very tasty, Grogrin. So here's an example. A 3rd level elf ranger with a 15 wisdom as a primary attribute attempts to track a pair of wily kobolds through a mountain pass. The player rolls a d20 and adds the ranger's level +3, attribute modifier +1, and racial bonus none to the roll. If the number generated is equal to or higher than the challenge class, okay, so no, this is saying equal to or higher, determined by the Castle Keeper, the attempt is successful and the ranger is able to track the kobolds to their secret lair. The challenge class is the combination of the challenge base, in this case 12, and the challenge level. Assume a 3 as the trail is a few days old, for a total of 15. The player rolls a 13 and adds 4 for a total of 17. This is greater than the 15 necessary, so the ranger successfully tracks the kobolds to their dark and foreboding lair atop Craggy Hill. A more thorough discussion of the rules and use of checks, called the Siege Engine, is located in the Castle Keeper section of the rules, and we'll eventually get there. While building the character, keep in mind that checks involving the use of a primary attribute are far more likely to be successful than checks involving secondary attributes. And as you can see, this is the flatter curve instead of the 2-for-1 that you get in D&D. Oh, it's fizzy sherbet. Oh. Int- so does it have like pop rocks in it, or is it somehow carbonated itself, Grogrin? All right. Now you have you may be familiar with many of the terms and the concepts here. Now, instead of sorcerers, we have illusionists. If we're comparing this straight up to D&D, uh, so they'll operate perhaps how you suspect. Although, let's take a look at some of the differences. Illusionists study the arcane and the nature of man and beast, using powers of oration and sorcery to twist the minds of those around them. They conjure manifestations and dreams, making the unreal real to all but the canniest of observers. And that is different than wizards. Wizards delve into the mysterious worlds of the arcane and wield magic like a weapon. They are often possessed of an overwhelming thirst for knowledge and, as often as not, power. We come over to paladins. Well, paladins and knights are different here. So, what about a knight? As maybe many of us are familiar with the concept of a paladin already. Knights are members of warrior castes. As born leaders, they use their social standing, charisma, gallant actions, and honorable codes to set the tone of behavior for those around them. Through their actions, they often inspire people to great deeds. Oh, very interesting, Grogrin. Well, that'd be a fun thing to try then. I'll have to make my way to New Zealand one day. I'd love to. There's certainly plenty of you down in New Zealand and Australia that I've come to know. That'd be a fun trip. Now, what about assassins? You know, we see assassins here, and by the way, you'll notice that so we have illusionists and knights instead of sorcerers and warlocks. If we're comparing a 12, hi big tiger man, or big tie German, dun dun dun, instead of warlocks and sorcerers. And this has the addition of assassins. Castles and Crusades encourages you to push the boundaries of your imagination, to adapt the game to your playing style and make it your own. The nature of the class may evolve, and the type of class you want to play as well. Assassins are stealthy and cunning, expert killers who rarely have motives beyond the collection of payment for a job well rendered. Although not always evil, they are typically indifferent to any suffering and pain they cause. And if yours is a very emotional and also evil assassin, that's fine too, despite what the book tells you, because what did also the book tell you? What's rule one? Have fun. Adapt things as you would like to see them adapted. And multi-classing, class and a half. Combine the skills with some limitations of two classes into one, allowing the player to create their own archetype. The class descriptions define the parameters and abilities of each class. It may be beneficial for a player to consult other chapters for details about saving throws, combat, or spell use before selecting a class. Each class description, and that's what we're going to do before we look into the classes. Each class description includes many features: the prime attribute, hit die, alignment, weapons allowed, and other aspects of the class. Most of the information needed by players is in this section. Familiarization with the class and its features is essential to playing the class well. Pardon. Consult with the castle keeper. Really, this is with every game. Talk to the person running it to see if there's any particular limitations, things that are completely off the table, or if there is something that is maybe a homebrew rule, something to modify. The castle keeper should consider creating an adventure according to the classes chosen by the players. For example, if a player decides to play a rogue who is the scion of a wealthy family and decides that this rogue enjoys pilfering the treasuries of family acquaintances, then planning an adventure in a dungeon atop a remote mountain wouldn't work out too well. Where have I heard this concept before about making an adventure around the party members? I don't know. Sounds random, probably dumb, and no forethought put into it. Maintaining a constant dialogue between the castle keeper and the players is important to an enjoyable game of Castles and Crusades. The castle keeper bears an awesome responsibility in the role of entertainer. To manage this, the players in the CK should come to an understanding prior to play to ensure that everyone's needs are met to the greatest degree possible. The CK is also responsible for ensuring that players are playing their classes properly and for helping players choose a class that best fits the type of adventurer they envision. So, little glossary here. Prime attribute. Hit dice, HD. The type of die rolled at each level for the character's hit points. Alignment, weapons, armor. Not going to worry about this stuff. You can either look them up or understand what armor is. Bonus to hit as a modifier for a 2-hit roll. So a little peek at the classes as we're scrolling by here. Illusionists get no armor nor shield. Well, I guess I don't know if this would necessarily be proficiency, nor helms, which have their own category here as well. And this is... Yeah, now we're getting into the actual classes. I'm not going to delve into this, but we can take a quick look. Here's the Barbarian, conveniently the first one. Prime attribute is Constitution. Makes sense. D12 hit die, any alignment, any weapons, any armor. And much like you see in the section in the Player's Handbook for D&D, here's what you get at the various levels being a Barbarian. So, not going to read through this. That's not what tonight's about. Let's skip up. Boop-a-doop-a-doop-a-doop. Boop-a-doop-a-doop. Boop-a-doop-a-doop. Here we go. There's our classes. Barbarian, Bard, Cleric, Druid, Fighter, Illusionist, Knight, Monk, Paladin, Ranger, Rogue, Wizard, Assassin, Multi-classing, and Class and a Half. We can take a quick look at what a racial stat block looks like, and we'll make our way through. As it looks like perhaps the next thing to take a look at is the nature of magic on 107. So we have some height and weights. This is bread and butter. We see this in other places too. Ways to help describe your characters. Dwarves hail from the depths of the earth and have lived there for ages beyond count. Okay, some background inspirational things. Things that you perhaps don't need to adopt for your character. You could be the outlier. Um, so some prime here for an idea to play a dwarf. Deep vision. This is okay, 120 feet in the darkest of nights, so that would be like dark vision. Colors tend to erode with deep vision, and objects appear in shades of gray. Otherwise, like normal sight, and dwarves can function well with no light at all. Oh, goodness. They get some other bonuses here. In particular, enmity against goblins and orcs, defensive expertise, giants and ogres, resistant to arcane magic because there is a spell resistance in this game. And if you say, wait a minute, SR? Oh man, I haven't experienced a character with spell resistance with SR in a while. Well, experience it again here through Castles and Crusades if you wish. Anyway, what you're going to see here is you get a lot of very interesting, like, specific things, which is most likely why the demi-humans here only get two primary stats and not three, like a more, I guess, all-rounder human would. And if you look through here as well, does this mean that only giants and ogres ever you could have as a defensive expertise? Talk to your castle keeper. Maybe your castle keeper actually wants to change it to two other enemies. Seems pretty cool. Seems fine to me. It's all that communication stuff. So we have some other art, descriptions of elves, and then we're going to skip ahead to 107 because I don't want to go over the stat blocks of dwarves and elves right now. You all get the idea. Determining encumbrance has its own... Well, should that be... These are more rules, and we are getting into rules. All right, so I'm not worried about how much a scarf costs, nor weighs. Although apparently a shot of liquor is 2 silver, so there you go. Encumbrance is an indication of how much a character is carrying. Rules are used to help determine the amount of equipment, material, and treasure a character can reasonably carry without suffering movement, attribute check, or combat penalties. The following guidelines include several facets in determining how much a character can carry. There's only so much a person can carry. Equipping a character should always be done, first and foremost, by using both common sense and reason. As purchases are made and treasures collected, there's a natural inclination on the part of players to prepare for all possible needs. This often overshadows the actual capacity of characters to equip themselves sensibly. This usually results in characters attempting to haul obscene amounts of material and what they carry when placed on anything other than a donkey or barge becomes comically impossible. Imagine the famous gnome rogue, Inkle, creeping down a narrow and darkened corridor with a huge bag of recently pilfered coins tied to a belt, along with clanking candelabras strapped to a backpack, a bow, arrows, a lantern, kniffs strapped to bandoliers, poking out of boots and tied to the forearms, and one might begin to envision a problem. Add to this poles, food, a tent, frying pan, and other sundries dangling off his body like the detritus of a tinker's wagon, and a picture of comic proportions begins to emerge. Considering this, it is unlikely this famous rogue, Inkle, would be able to sneak past a puddle of algae, much less that restive ogre guarding the exit to its lair. Give him a chest to haul, and Inkle is not going anywhere. The easiest way to determine how much a character can carry is simply to imagine what is being carried and decide whether or not it makes sense to have that much equipment and how that potentially affects the character's movement and ability to perform certain actions. Having a player describe where the many items being hauled are located on the character's body, and then have them imagine it should suffice to maintain control over the amount of material being carried, and players eventually begin setting their own limits. Now there was a deadlift, quantity and such for a strength score, but look at this. Look at this. Encumbrance is what you can reasonably describe to your castle keeper as you being able to carry in that reasonable fashion. Hi, Demon Quiller. Hi, GMV. You're a half-class kind of guy, says GMV. Is Champions RPG still a thing? I don't know offhand, Tiger Man. You saw a mini like that, James? One that was just completely burdened down? Yeah, picture Samwise Gamgee carrying all the pots and pans and everything else. However, situations inevitably arise which require a concrete determination of a character's encumbrance and the effects these have on the ability to move, fight, or perform other actions. The following guidelines are supplied for just that purpose, yet bear in mind the rules must always give way to reason, common sense, or narrative development. A character has an encumbrance rating equal to their strength score. This is then modified by the character's prime attributes. If the character has either the strength or constitution attributes as prime, they may add 3 to their strength score to determine their encumbrance rating. If the character has both strength and constitution as prime, then they may add 6. All right. The encumbrance rating is the total amount of encumbrance values the character can carry before being burdened. A character is considered unburdened, burdened, or overloaded according to the amount of EV they are carrying. If the character is carrying less than their encumbrance rating in EV, then they are unburdened. If they are carrying more than their encumbrance rating, but less than triple their encumbrance rating, ER, then they are burdened. A character that is carrying more than 3 times their encumbrance rating is considered overburdened. Huh. Wait. EV? Encumbrance values? Oh, yeah. Okay. Now, if you want specific pounds, here you go. If you want some heavy boots, then it's 4 pounds, or it would be 1 EV. If you want something that is kind of like the bulk system in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. So you don't necessarily have to track the pounds and ounces of every little thing you're carrying. Does it have an encumbrance value or not? And then compare it to what your character's encumbrance can be. All right, Belladonna, thank you for lurking. So hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully this is it's a pretty streamlined way to go about it. Here's an example. The ancient and wizened priest of Thoth, Memnon, has a strength score of 7 and a constitution as one of his primes. His ER is 10 due to his strength score of 7, modified by +3 for his constitution prime. On a trip to an ancient burial ground to lay a soul properly to rest, Memnon expects trouble, so he is carrying a lot of material with him. His equipment's encumbrance values add up to 17. Memnon's categories for encumbrance are unburdened 0 to 10, burdened 11 to 30, and overburdened 31 plus. With an EV total of 17, Memnon is slightly encumbered and suffers the penalties for that category. If Memnon later picked up a statue with an EV of 20, his encumbrance would then be 37 and Memnon would be overburdened. Meanwhile, his brawny companion Surik has a strength of 16, and both strength and constitution as primes. Surik has an encumbrance rating of 22, 16 for his strength score, modified by +6 for having both strength and constitution as primes. Surik's categories for encumbrance are unburdened 0 to 22, burdened 23 to 66, and overburdened 67 plus. If Surik carried with him the same equipment as Memnon, he would be unburdened since EV 17 is less than his ER of 22. If Surik then picked up the EV 20 statue, he would only be burdened. Make sense? Hi, Coffee Cat. We're talking about encumbrance in Castles and Crusades, which is a streamlined system here. If you look at the gear, you can measure things in with a particular weight if you wish, though there is this encumbrance value that there's an encumbrance value to things that makes it a little bit more streamlined and easier. There is, yep, I'm sorry, there is some basic arithmetic. Though I will say, even if you don't want to do addition on a Friday, Sierra, the first rule was, can you reasonably describe what you're carrying? And if so, then carry on. Otherwise, if it comes down to needing to track the minutia, then you can do it in a couple ways. James North says, poll on Trollord's forum. More than half, I don't bother, but I keep it realistic. Because I think there's a certain practicality, or people would rather tell their story than play accounting mini games. And so far, this system can accommodate any of those, right? Ad hoc encumbrance, it's a function of the size, weight, and bulk of an object. Encumbrance values for some common items are provided in the equipment list, but it might come up during a game session that the castle keeper must quickly determine the EV of an object that isn't listed on the equipment list. To do so, a relatively quick system has been developed. To determine the EV for an item not on the equipment list, get a general idea for the dimensions of the object in feet and use the largest of the dimensions as the base EV. So a statue that was 5 feet by 2 feet by 1 foot would have a base EV of 5. After determining the base EV, add a +2 modifier to that number for every dimension that is greater than 1 foot. So the 5 by 2 by 1 statue would add a +2 for the 2 feet dimension, giving it a final base EV of 7. If the item has all of its dimensions as less than a foot, use a base EV of 1. Finally, the weight, balance, and materials the items are made up of should be factored in. So if you need it, if you need some ad hoc weight for something, there's a chart for it. Do you have to memorize this? No. Not at all, because the system itself doesn't seem to suppose you need to often, if ever, do such a thing, and it still will default back to the first rule of, can you reasonably describe yourself carrying this item or these items? All right, so different items here: worn incapacity objects. Capacity being like a quiver or something, right? Coins. There's no way to determine exact weights and encumbrance of coin. Use the following for a baseline. Each coin in CNC is roughly 1 ounce. This would make gold coins, as the metal is heavier, smaller than silver coins, whose metal is lighter. Every 16 coins is equal to a pound. However, coins have almost no bulk to them, but may have weight. A single coin or a pound of coins has no appreciable EV. 10 pounds or 160 coins is equal to 1 EV. Okay, then. Now, what happens if you are encumbered? The effects of carrying too much equipment are potentially hazardous to characters. Much care needs to be given to how much is being hauled around. The penalties to movement and attribute checks are listed in the chart. There you go. Here's the exhaustive chart, which you can go and reference these with either a cheat sheet or a screen, or if you have the player's book there, you can open up to it. But it doesn't sound like it happens all that often in the practical play of the players giving feedback, as James Norse said, or think about the ways that you role play in your games. If you feel that this is a rule that you're not really going to ever look at or use, skip it over and come back to it if it is relevant. I'm not bringing it up because you have to be checking it every single moment. Every time you pick up a coin, I got to recalculate my living algebra problem, right? Expert weapons include a variety of well-crafted items: sword with razor-sharp edges, keenly balanced arrows, axes with weighted heads that cleave armor and bone, spears with extra points, etc. These items gain a +1 to hit or a +1 to damage bonus. These expert weapons cost 10 times the amount of a normal item. So it's similar to what you might have seen in other editions of D&D, like masterwork items. In some rare instances, weapons are so crafted that they gain a +1 to damage and a +1 to hit bonus. However, these items cost 25 times the amount of a normal item. These are called greater expert weapons. For example, an expert longsword that gains a +1 damage bonus or a +1 to hit would cost 150 gold pieces. A greater expert longsword that gains a +1 to damage and +1 to hit bonus would cost 375. Gets into a similar concept with armor. Is that going to come up all the time? Maybe not, so go back and reference it in the occasion that you need to. More beautiful art, and I love looking through books for the art that's there. All right, now what about magic? How does magic work in this fantasy world? Magic lies at the heart of fantasy, and so it does in Castles and Crusades. Of greatest importance for the players is the acquisition of magic spells and an explanation of how spells are used in the game. The following is a list and brief description of terms regarding magic in Castles and Crusades, with which the players and castle keepers should be familiar. Arcane magic, learned by wizards and illusionists. Okay. Divine magic, clerics and druids. Illusion magic, the type of magic mastered by illusionists. Illusion magic is a type of arcane magic, but is inherently different from a wizard's magic, as it affects the mind's perceptions, deceives senses, or creates arcane energies. Components or special ingredients. You might be familiar: verbal, somatic, material. Spell slots, bonus spells, known spells. You're probably familiar with many of this if you've already played, and if not, I would suggest getting the book. You can sit down and read these in particular here. Special ability possessed by certain monsters and characters that may negate spells cast against them. Spell resistance does exist in Castles and Crusades. The nature of magic. In CNC, 4 classes can cast spells: clerics, druids, illusionists, and wizards. Before addressing the specific spells or their use and acquisition by characters of these classes, it is important to understand the fundamental nature and differences between the magic they utilize. The magic used by clerics and druids is classified as divine because it is granted to them after prayer or supplication to a deity or other powerful entity or elemental force. In most cases, clerics receive their magic from deities, who may limit or place special restrictions on its use. Druids gain their magic ability from more varied sources, be they primal forces, nature gods, or elemental powers. Thus, clerics and druids act as a conduit, channeling and focusing magic originating from a higher entity. This similarity can be seen in the replication of specific spells or spell types in their spell lists. Clerics and druids often cast the same spells in a similar manner. Magic used by wizards and illusionists is classified as arcane because it is learned from ancient knowledge and passed down from one generation of magic users to the next, either through apprenticeship or textual record. Wizards and illusionists, unlike clerics and druids, share very few spells in common. The two forms of arcane magic are quite distant from one another. Wizards use their mystical knowledge to create and give form, or to enhance or physically alter form. Illusionists, on the other hand, alter one's perception of form and reality. The source of arcane magic may vary from game to game. Some may portray arcane magic as negative or positive energy channeled from other planes of reality. Others may portray it as existing in and around all things. No matter the source, the arcane magic of a wizard is quite distant from that of an illusionist. Wizardly magic deals with direct manipulation of the real and concrete. Wizards use magic to create and give form, or to enhance or physically alter form. They funnel it, channel it, and redirect it. A wizard's magic is based on the metaphysical properties of the world around them. Even though a wizard may alter reality, it is most important to remember that such reality is perceived in the same way by all who view it, whether the caster, the recipient, the victim, or anyone viewing the spell effect. In contrast, illusionists utilize a very different type of magic. Illusionists alter the perception of form and reality for each creature who is subjected to it or views it. An illusion is every bit as real to the spell's recipient or viewer as a physical creation. Indeed, an illusionist calls forth their magic and gives it a form that can be more easily perceived to the senses. The actual illusion is the comprehensible form the magic is given. Thus, it could be argued that illusionist magic is the most powerful of all magics, like blue in Magic the Gathering. As it can allow those affected by it to defy nature and its physical laws, even beyond those that exist in a fantasy universe. In practical terms, the illusionist convinces a spell recipient that what they sense is real by altering and giving comprehensible form to magic. A rope, though illusionary, is real to the one climbing it. A bridge, though illusionary, is real to the one crossing it. An illusionist can even trick the mind to such an extent that the physical body responds. The alteration of the recipient's perception brings about actual physical effect through the force of the illusionist's magic. Thus, illusions can cause damage and can heal damage with lasting effect. These fundamental differences between the spellcasting classes affect gameplay in different ways. Each spell description cannot cover all situations that may arise during a game, but players, and more importantly castle keepers, need to keep the above discussion in mind when such situations do arise and necessitate a ruling, so that the game may continue without long debate and discussion. That whole get on with it! Many spells appear on both the cleric and druid spell lists, whereas wizard and illusionist do not share as many spells. The cleric and illusionist share a few spells, yet even when the same spell appears on more than one class spell list, It should be understood that the nature of the magic, and sometimes even the casting and effect of the spell, is different. An example, Angrod is wounded in battle. He risks the chance of death if not healed soon. Imok, an illusionist, comes forward, casting Cure Critical Wounds upon the dwarf. Angrod is amazed to see his wounds heal. Imok has cured through magic and altered the perceivable reality so that the mind of the dwarf is... I'm sorry, hang on, I lost my spot here. Oh yeah, so that the mind of the dwarf and those viewing the healing can understand it. The power is nothing like the cleric's healing, though it has the same game results. Preparing spells, that's going to be as per your class. Read into it. I'm not going to get into that minutia. But it does talk about resting, needing to memorize spells. This is important. I'm not worried about that as a general rule in how to play. Or how to acquire new spells here. So there's greater detail here, but it did get a lot across. What do you want to do if you want to write your spells, replace a spell book, keep going from there. Oh, I really, really like this picture. That is cool. That is cool. Casting spells, concentration is a thing. Many of you might be familiar with that. Remember, this is born from D&D, in particular, 3rd or 3.x. Whether that's a 0 or a 5, that's up to you. Casting time, rounds, minutes, hours. Let's see, targeting range. That's going to be straightforward to reference. Saving throws against them have similar effects in D&D as they do in C&C. Creature can voluntarily forego a saving throw. Items surviving. Sometimes the spell specifies whether items in the area of effect for the spell are potentially damaged. These items are required to make a saving throw or are destroyed. You have a harmless spell. Spell resistance. Oh, pardon. Sorry. Spell resistance is a special defensive ability. A defender's spell resistance is like an armor class against magical attacks. All creatures have a minimum SR of 1. If a spell is being resisted by a defender with spell resistance, the caster of the spell must roll a d20. The result of that d20 roll must be equal to or greater than the spell resistance of the target for the spell to take effect. The spell resistance line and or the descriptive text of a spell description explains whether or not the spell resistance applies, as some spells are not affected by a target creature's spell resistance. Spell resistance applies even if a given spell also allows the target creature a saving throw. The effects of spell resistance, if any, are applied first, and then the creature may also make a saving throw. In most cases, spell resistance applies only when a resistant creature is targeted by the spell, not when a resistant creature encounters a spell that is already in place, such as Wall of Iron. The terms object and harmless mean the same thing for saving throws. A creature with spell resistance must voluntarily drop the resistance in order to receive the effects of a spell noted as harmless without the check described above. If a spell does not include a spell resistance entry, then assume no spell resistance check is allowed. Spell components, verbal, somatic, material, focus, divine focus. We've been there and seen that. We do have our spell lists. Okay. That's the detail stuff. It has not just the lists. Of course, it describes what's going on here. Not going to get into those details at this moment. So actually, with that, I mean, so we touched on it. We see a lot of similarities. Casting time, spell descriptions. I guess, so we have the Castle Keeper in the game, as well as combat and initiative and such. So let's do this. I am going to get up and just take a little walk around. I need to refresh myself as I finish my drink. And when we come back, we've talked about the rule basics into which the variables of race and class and other things can be plugged in. We've talked about the basics, and now let's look at 199, the Castle Keeper in the game, and take a look at that. Let's see how combat plays out, which, I mean, look, this is, it seems to be pretty succinct. Turning undead is specific for clerics. And then we can look at things like rewards, movement, and go on from there. And hey, there's even an example of play that we can get into as well. So I will be back. Give me 5 to 10 minutes to go around. I might eat a piece of cheese. Who knows? It's a wild night. I know, eating a piece of cheese. And I'll be back in a little bit, and let's continue looking it over. But if you say, you know what, this is mostly the same. There might be small differences between things. Maybe you out there, are ready to play a game of Castles and Crusades and don't need to worry a lot about learning everything new from the ground up. It might just be a step sideways to adapt. Anyway, I'll be back soon, everyone. Hold on tight.